And let's go ahead and get started with our warm up. So go ahead and stand up. We're going to start by just rolling our necks out in one direction. Oh, and roll the other way. Nod your head yes. Shake your head no. Shake your head maybe, bringing the ear to the shoulder, not the shoulder to the ear. Cool. Arms out in a T, tiny circles forward, starting to load some weight into the shoulders. And reverse that. Go ahead and start wringing out the towel, bringing one shoulder forward, one back, twisting around the T-spine. All righty, shake it out a little bit. Once again, find those protrusions on your hips, the ASIS joints. Make sure they stay forward. Take the arms out, palms upturned. We are going to twist, looking over our shoulder at our upturned hand while we keep our hips facing forward. So we are twisting into the thoracic spine and not at the hips at this point. All righty, now go ahead and actually let the twist come into the hips as well. But make sure when you are twisting from the hips, your knees stay tracking over your toes. So you're not shifting into the territory you don't want to be shifting into. All right, shake it out a little bit. We're going to do these figure eights around our shoulders. So hand crosses in front and then goes behind. And switch the direction. All righty, switch to the other arm. And switch the direction. All righty, now isolate the hips, just kind of roll them out a little bit. And go the other way. And because we are kind of going over some basics today, I want to actually break down our side kind of pelvic tilt drill in a little more detail than normal. This is something I do literally every morning to make sure I can kind of have access to that full range of motion as much as I can. So even if you're like, I totally know what we're doing, I don't need to talk about this in detail, we're going to play with a little bit of variations that will hopefully make you feel it in a different way. So we're going to start with our very basic variation, and we're going to use the kind of the proprioception of our hands on ourselves as well. So line up the thumbs with the belly button, middle fingers in the creases where the legs meet the pelvic floor. Again, this is neutral spine. If my butt goes out and I arch my back, this is an anterior pelvic tilt. If I tuck my tailbone and kind of like try to pop forward, this is a posterior pelvic tilt. Posterior pelvic tilt, my fingers are closer together. Neutral, they are where we started. Anterior, they are farther apart. So we are going to move through this range of motion from three different positions. The first one we're going to go through is our normal kind of neutral position. So we're standing, my shoulders are stacked over my hips, over my ankles, and we just want to slowly try to go through this full range of motion here. So I'm moving as much as I can into an interior tilt and then pulling that as much as I can into a posterior tilt. You will notice I'm trying to keep my shoulders and my knees more or less in one place so that this action is actually the result of my pelvic floor and my lower abdominals and my hip flexors. All righty. So after about 10 to 15 of those, we're going to come into this sort of like hand on our knees position. From the side, this is basically going to look like a twerk in slow motion. So, you know, you get a little 2-for-1 action here. So go through this same pelvic tilt in this twerk position. You will find that for some people, it might be a little easier to access this range when you're kind of hinged at the hips like this. For other folks, it can be a little more difficult. Kind of just depends on your body or what you're accustomed to or kind of what the rest of your practice is, which is why we have these multiple modes that we go through the position in. Alrighty, stand up, shake that out. So we've got one more position, and it's kind of in a position where we're starting in hip extension. So what that means is that I'm going to find a way to do this that is comfortable for you. Try to think about paralleling your feet. Take your knees forward a little bit, but not too much. So you're actually starting with a diagonal from your knees to your shoulder. Doesn't have to be full on like sissy squat position. You're just kind of trying to move your shoulders behind your knees. And then from here, same thing, trying to access the pelvic tilt. And it's probably going to be more difficult to find this, especially without access to the legs in a different way. So really just try to hone in on that pelvic tilt as much as you can. Really try to find as large of a range of motion as is possible, because this position is one that because it's so difficult, being able to articulate the pelvic tilt in this position is one step closer to being able to do it whenever you want to, upside down. Alrighty, shake it out. Before I move on, any questions on that? Because I couldn't super see the stream, but did we all find somewhat of access in all three positions? Cool. Alrighty, back to our normal workout. We will real quickly just kind of roll out the knees a little bit, especially since we just did that hip extension exercise. Make sure the feet are pressing the floor, each four corners of each foot as you do this. Go the other way. Alrighty, from here, take the feet about hips distance apart, plop down into a squat. Try to keep the feet flat if you can. If you're having trouble, see if you maybe need to take a wider or a closer position to get the feet flat. If you need to elevate the heels a little bit, that's okay. Just kind of shift around. We want to start working into the hip socket here. Get that synovial fluid going. Oh, alrighty. From here, put the hands on the floor, parallel the feet, hinge at the hips, and start pressing into the floor and walking out your feet to work into your hamstrings. We are going to touch base on kind of what I consider proper form for quote unquote kicking up today. So we do want to warm up our hammies and our hips a little bit. Alrighty, from here, keep the feet on the ground, walk the feet out so you're kind of in a wide angle fold, trying to still kind of stay in this hip hinge, try to elongate the lower back instead of arching it. Place the left hand on the ground, right hand up. Roll out the wrist a few times. Right hand down, left hand up. Again, we're working into the T-spine here from this hip hinge position, kind of helps us stay out of the lower back. Now go a little quicker, back and forth, right hand up, left hand up. And then if you want to start crossing, so the opposite hand is touching the opposite foot, you're still reaching towards the ceiling in between. We're just kind of ballistically working into this to maybe get a little deeper. After a few of those, bring the hands back to center, walk your feet back to this hinge position, and lower down onto the floor. And we'll go through our wrists. Look at this. I have a second light now, so hopefully you can see parts when I'm closer. Maybe. I don't know. This room, there's so much white and it's so bright out that this is kind of always a problem. Anyway, shoulders over the hands. First, we're going to start by circling around, keeping the arms locked out as straight as possible. And go the other direction. Spend some time just shifting forward and back. This forward and back positioning of the shoulders is the one that is probably most common when you're actually navigating balance. So one of the things that it's really helpful to get comfortable with, and I've talked about a conditioning drill for this before, is to actually be able in this straight arm push position to be able to kind of let your shoulders planche forward a little more than you think you might need to. So you do want to really start kind of working into this wrist extension. Because it's going to be helpful to have the strength and mobility there. Alrighty, from there, return to the neutral position, push your fingertips into the floor and lift up the whole hands. Again, the elbows are staying straight as possible. And I'm really thinking about here the activation of the fingertips pushing into the floor more than kind of using the rest of my body to pull the heel of the hand up. This push into the floor is what we want to think about activating, again, in terms of balance. because when we are upside down, if we feel like our hips are coming too far forward in front of our center of mass, the only thing we really have to save us from falling over is how hard we're pushing our fingertips into the floor. So it's kind of super important to develop the sort of tactile sensation of this actual push here. Alrighty, return to neutral. This time we're going to keep the bottom knuckles onto the floor and lift up just the heel. Similarly, as we've also talked about before, part of what we try to do is shift our weight into this bottom knuckle position. So then we have access to kind of use our heels and our fingertips to kind of navigate our balance. Palms flat again, external rotation of the elbow pits, pushing into the floor, keeping the arms straight. Good. All righty. Just walk the hands around now. Just trying to get a lot of different positions. At some point, go ahead and end with your fingers pointing back at you. Find this straight stretch here. Go through a couple cat-cows. Alrighty, from this position, go ahead and pull your booty back towards your heels, slowly peeling your hands off. Make some circles with your wrists here, maybe kind of one finger at a time, fan the fingers, go the other way. Roll out the wrists in both directions. Alrighty, nice. So as per usual, we're going to start with our active shoulder stretch. And again, we went through specifically kind of that full range from that pelvic tilt. So I will, go to my grave saying this, but when we're doing this, make sure you're really tucking the tailbone so you're elongating your lower back as you do this drill. You don't want to be in this anterior tilt where you're arching, because then you're just kind of stretching your spine. You're not doing anything with your shoulder. So you really want to make sure you're locking into that posterior pelvic tilt. The lower back is long and flat. Alrighty, y'all ready for this? Find this diamond position in front of you. Raise the arms up. Thumbs point behind you, pinkies in front of you. Pulse and reach actively for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and hold for 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Relax, shake it out. Next, we're going to do one arm at a time. So again, check in with that lower back. Make sure it's elongated. Make sure you're not arching it. Find the diamond position of your hands in front of you. Raise the arms up. Left hand is back. Right hand grabs your left lat. Reach and extend for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Hold for 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Shake it out. All right, last arm here. Check in with that lower back. Make sure your tailbone is tucked. Find that starting diamond position. Raise the arms until you start to feel your ribs flare out. Grab your right lat with your left arm. Pulse and extend for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Hold for 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Shake it out. Oh. Roll the shoulders around. All righty. So normally, as y'all know, what we would do next is we would do some kick-ups and we would do a wall hold. But because I want to really break down and have us all thinking way super hard about the basics, I actually want to talk through those specific things first. So the first thing we're going to actually talk about is our method of kicking up. And I always use scare quotes when I say kicking up, because I feel like the way that I biomechanically consider the entrance to a handstand in the middle of the room is not actually a kick. It's more of a weight shift and a hop. So you're kind of hopping up into a handstand rather than kicking at it. So let me bring this closer here. One of the things that the most important thing that I tend to point out to people is that when we are working on kicking up to a handstand, I want to start with my hands already on the ground. From this position, what I want to think about, and I'll show the camera in front here, is sort of the same position that we did our entire wrist warm up in. So I really want to kind of line up my shoulders with my bottom knuckles here. So I don't want to be back here where my head and my shoulders are behind my hands, but I actually kind of want to push myself forward, try to kind of conceivably line up the edge of my shoulder with these bottom knuckles, and that's my starting position. That's where I'm starting from. From there, I'm going to pick one leg. My natural size to do this is with my right leg up, so I will demo like that. And I'm going to lift up that leg. I'm going to actually get myself kind of as close as I can with the standing leg. And I'm going to think about using the leg that's off the ground as kind of the navigation for where I'm going. The foot that is on the ground, I'm going to bend into that leg and hop off of it as I push into the ground and look at the space between my hands. That puts me in a better position to enter my handstand than if I am just kind of starting up here and just kind of randomly throwing myself down and praying that it works. So aim for 5 to 10 of those on each side. And I want you to really focus on the setup and see if you can find a difference between where you're positioning when you start versus how easy it can be to actually get up. You can do this against the wall, or you can do it in the middle of the room. We're not as concerned with balance here. It's more about really figuring out how to make it easiest for you to actually get in the position where your hips are going in line over your head. Good. So to make this even more challenging and to make sure you're really checking in on what you are doing, I do recommend actually lifting your hands up off the ground in between each kick up. So if we keep our hands on the ground the whole time as we're doing it, we have a tendency to just get farther and farther more open into our arms and away in the stack. So if we're really consciously thinking of like, okay, hands on the ground, shifting forward, going up, coming back down, lift the hands up, go back to the ground and really reset. So you're going through that whole process again. A lot of the times, if we keep the hands on the ground, we just get in this habit. And as we do that, we get kind of farther and farther out. And without even consciously realizing it, we lose some of the ease we've developed in that kick up. It will also be a lot more exhausting if you have to stand up in between. So definitely pace yourself. And if I haven't said it yet, also make sure you are trying to lead with each leg. So try both sides. Ava, look at the ground, not behind you. Jessica, these are looking good. Congratulations on being away from the wall. Good, Lucia. So don't forget about that shoulder shift first. So hands down and then shift the shoulder slightly forward to try to get them to line up with the bottom knuckles. And remember, Moon, you're hopping off the foot on the ground. You're not kicking with the foot that's up. Good, Jamie. Try to shift your weight a little farther forward. So you're already starting in a closer position to the stack rather than having to get up from back here, because that's where we find it harder. If you really think about planching forward, it's way easier to kind of find that stack position. When you've done about 5 on each side, feel free to take a rest, because like I said, this is going to get super exhausting really quickly if you do like 100 of these. Wrists are sore. Remember, we can always pop into the squat, apply some pressure on the forearms and roll the wrists out. Always super helpful. Cool. All righty. So did we find any difference there when we consciously thought about what we were doing versus when we just kind of go for it? I will take silence as an answer. We can just move on if nobody has any insight. I got thumbs up. Okay, that's enough for me. Cool. So remember that when you are kicking up is that we don't want to just be tossing ourselves onto the ground. We want to be placing our hands, thinking about where our shoulders are, and trying to actually shift our weight into position rather than just kind of trying to rely on momentum to make magic happen. Cool. So the second part that we always do as warm up in my class is a chest to wall hold. Normally, I say that we don't need to think about technique while we're doing that because it's mostly about building time under tension. But the one thing that I do think is super important to start playing with in that position, even if you're just using it to build strength, is both considering the position of the shoulders and considering the tilt of the pelvis. So let's see if I can better. Can I get this? No, no, that's not far back enough. Okay, that's gonna have to stay where it was, and I'm just gonna have to be farther away. Alrighty, so first things first, way we get onto the wall. Again, some people cartwheel on and off, and that's okay. But it's more helpful and it's more of a good conditioning exercise to be able to walk up and down. So we start in this sort of quadrupedal position, a couple feet away from the wall. The first thing I need to do is coordinate both my hands and feet moving. A lot of people get to the wall, they put their feet up, and they're like, I can't go any higher. And the reason is either they're not moving their hands or they're not moving their feet. You have to move all four limbs. It's very important. So that is how we get up. Hands and feet, climb to whatever feels comfortable. Eventually, for this drill to have its like maximum impact of being helpful, you probably want to get to the point where you can get more or less, kind of depending on your body, about a foot from the wall, because this is the position that we can start to actually both play with the planche into the shoulders, trying to again find that alignment where our shoulders are in line with our bottom knuckles, and in the same place, we can access the pelvic tuck. So guess what we're going to do? We're going to look at adjusting those two things while we're in our chest to wall position. The first thing we're going to do the pelvic tuck, because we've spent more time talking about that, and it tends to be a little more accessible for people. So that same drill that we did in warm up, where we're trying to actually just move through our full pelvic tilt, we're going to climb into a chest to wall position and try to go through that full range of motion while we're upside down. That's all I'll say for now. And keep your gaze on the space between your hands the whole time. That was for you, Ava. Good, Lucia. Try to think about how you can make this less just movement of the legs and more about an actual elongation of the lower back. It is a lot more difficult, but like being able to differentiate between just kind of a tuck that is shifting our leg. Yes, yes, that elongation is what you're looking for. Good. Good, Jamie. Good, Jessica. Good, Moon. Ava, how'd it feel? You came down before I got to your square. I'm going to have us do this one more time, but take a rest first, obviously, if you want to. This time, we have a specific goal in mind via the sort of movement through this pelvic tilt. We want to try to really find this posterior pelvic tilt and elongate the back as much as possible to the point where it's separate from our legs that if I start in this anterior position, I want to feel like I can use this elongation of my lower back to push into the wall in a certain way. Sorry, I just said the opposite of what I mean. To not push into the wall. We want to be able to tilt the pelvis without feeling like our toes are pushing into the wall. Apparently, when I'm upside down, it makes me say the opposite of what I mean. So you're setting up the same way, but we want to try to figure out how to really pull into that posterior pelvic tilt, elongate the back without feel like you're putting more pressure into your toes at the wall. If you're already accessing this, it probably means you're pretty close to balancing already. at least in terms of moving from the hips. But just do a test with your toes staying on the wall the whole time to see what that kind of feels like. If this is something you haven't thought about before, just kind of try it out and see what happens. You don't have to stay up as long as you did on the last one because I don't want to completely exhaust us this quickly, but it is an important thing to be able to determine. All right, Ava, I'm looking at you first this time since I missed you last time. Good. Ava, are your knees off the wall? Okay. Good. There you go. There it is. Looks good. Moon. There you go, Jessica. Are you kind of feeling that? Or sorry, Jessica, I met Lucia. Are you feeling that differently than before? It looked like you were accessing it a little better. Yes, I said Jessica, and I was looking at you because the ending of the name. Good. Jessica and Jamie, actual Jessica this time. That's looking solid. Good. All right, cool. That looked great. It looked like we all found, well, I will say it looked visibly different from my end than the first time when you maybe weren't focusing on it the same way. So I'm going to assume that it probably felt a little different to be able to think about that. So good. Congratulations, everyone. So the next thing I said I do want to talk about in this chest to wall position is the slight planche of the shoulders. And this one is a little more difficult to think about because for a lot of people I have found, well, what I will say is for a lot of folks, either the hips are accessible or the shoulder planche is accessible. And it's very rare that many people have both kind of right off the bat. Uh, so it's totally fine to be better at one than the other because it's a great starting point to be at than rather than having access to neither. So to think about the position of the shoulders, um, we've talked about this conditioning drill before, so we're going to touch base really quickly on it because as per usual I have way too much to say and we're technically not even through the warm-up with just 15 minutes yet. But so for this conditioning drill, which is more focused on scapular retraction and protraction, I'm going to show this here before I go to the wall because it gets lost. We want to think about turning our hands so our thumbs are pointing to the wall. We don't want to be at a full 90 degrees and we don't want to be in our normal handstand position because either way that ends up too much on our wrist. So thumbs pointing towards the wall, it's kind of like 45 to like 60 degrees. You want to be relatively close to the wall, but you need to be able to get up there. This is a back to wall drill. And important thing to remember about this is that it's not a drill to work on balance. It's purely a conditioning drill to build scapular strength, which we need for this sort of planching position. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to the wall, like I said, relatively close, ideally probably like 6 inches or less. Remember, you want the thumbs facing the wall. You still want to be at about shoulders width distance with the hands. You're going to kick up to the wall and let just the heels of the hands be at the wall. From this one, Ava, this is the one time I will let you actually look through your arms at the wall behind you. While we keep the arms straight, I want to think about shifting forward, trying to get my shoulder blades and just my shoulder blades to touch the wall. So my arms are straight. I'm kind of using the retraction and protraction of my shoulder blades along with the push of the ground to bring my shoulder blades to the wall. This is kind of tricky. You will find out very quickly if you are too far away, in which case get closer. Just do like a couple, like 5 reps or so, just to kind of get a feel for what's happening here. When you're actually using this as a conditioning drill, I always recommend trying to accumulate 30 over an entire session, kind of no matter how you get there. It might be like 2 at a time. It could be like sets of 15. It can be whatever. Good. So Lucia, try to not use your head to pull through, but think about pushing into the ground and trying to retract the shoulder blades so your shoulders are shifting forward and getting closer to the wall. It's a very, very weird sensation. Yes, that was it, Ava. Good. Moon, you can probably walk your hands a little closer if you feel comfortable doing that, because you're a little far right now, and it's going to be harder the farther you are. Good, Jessica and Jamie.
Is this the right motion? So it's like this, and I'm doing this?
So you're not closing off the shoulders at all. You want to keep the shoulders open, and it's more like you're wrapping the shoulders. So if you think about your armpits having eyeballs, you're kind of trying to get them to look at each other, but it's not necessarily you're not necessarily going into a rotation of the arm because your arms have the weight pushing them into the ground. So what should be happening is this sort of retraction and protraction of the shoulder blades, which is what allows you to get closer and farther away from the wall.
Oh, so it's like a shoulder shrug.
Yes, mm-hmm.
Okay, got it.
It's not like an up and down shrug. It's more
Right.
of a retraction and protraction shrug.
Okay.
So you don't. It's not a push necessarily. It's more a closing and opening if you think of it from the shoulders. But if you try to think about it from the shoulder blades, it's kind of a release and an engagement in a weird way. It's actually I've never totally tried to vocalize it in that way, so it's the language part is hard. But you will feel this generally. Let's see here. So Lucia, those are kind of shrugs up and down. So try to push your heels of your hands into the ground, keeping your arms straight to move your shoulder blades to the wall. So try to keep without moving your neck at all. Yeah, there you go. There you're starting to find it. Yes. Yeah. So you don't need to shrug like that. So just the part that's, yep, like good. You're starting to find it. So you don't need to worry about this part. It's just think about this driving energy into the heels of the hands to move this closer and back. It's super strange and weird to access. So it's like not a surprise that at first you're like, wait, what is happening? It took me like a good 2 weeks before I was like, I don't understand. Okay. So, but moving on from that, that's a good conditioning drill to start actually building the scapular strength that helps with kind of being able to kind of planche to the position you want to. Um, so the drill that I want to talk about from our chest to wall position is kind of similar to what we did last week, where we used pulling, or maybe that was 2 weeks ago, pulling down into a tuck position to make our weight shift into our bottom knuckles. So what we're aiming for this time is to kind of figure out how we can, with straight arms and with our kind of tucked, elongated lower back, shift the weight of our body onto the bottom knuckles. Most of the time on the wall, we'll start with our weight in our heels here. We want the weight to be on these bottom knuckles. So the way I'm going to go for this is by literally pushing those bottom knuckles into the ground and kind of trying to shift those shoulder blades forward. My toes stay on the wall the whole time. I like to tuck them over because it's just easier. But if you want to have them tucked under, you can do that too. You kind of want to lock out your hips. You'll notice my hips are not contracting. And I'm just kind of moving back and forth, planching forward. It's kind of the same thing we were doing with our shoulder blades in the conditioning drill, except now we're actually using it to find the alignment we're looking for in a handstand. This is also something that I might not necessarily be able to see because it is a weight shift thing. So you really kind of have to rely on the appropriate, like on the bodily sensation of feeling the weight kind of activate into those bottom knuckles. And the other thing I will say about this is you can't just shift the weight and expect to feel it. You also need to be thinking about actively pushing into those bottom knuckles as well. So we didn't actually do it in warm up today, but we've done the drill before where after we flick our fingers like normal, I always say to open your hands and try to open them even more. So it's kind of like you're pulsing energy out of these bottom knuckles. That is what we think about as a way to kind of push into those bottom knuckles on the floor. So we both need to think about pushing into that position, and then I can kind of use the push against the wall to kind of redistribute my weight. But I do need to make sure that I'm kind of locking out my hips so I'm not just kind of moving my hips when I'm pushing. So that was like a way more complicated way for me to explain what we're doing. But let's give it a shot and see what happens. And again, with all of this, keep the gaze on the space on the floor between your hands. Good. Yeah, Lucia, it looks like this makes a lot more sense to you in this direction than the other way because it looks like you're doing exactly what you should be. Good job. So, Jessica, I want you, just as an experiment in a larger adjustment, to not position your hips as perfectly. So, you have to experience a little more planche to get that weight shift. I mean, I guess you could also do this by just actually walking your hands out a little farther and keeping your toes on the wall. It's just going to kind of make it a little more challenging and force you to have to think about the shoulders even more. This is always what happens when I'm like, we're doing basics today. I then basically make everyone be on their hands for like 35 out of 45 minutes and everyone is dying by the end. So I apologize. I just get over eager and I'm like, let's do all the things. But did we start finding this weight shift? It looked like everyone was kind of accessing that planche a little bit, which is what we're looking for. So all of this that we went through specifically was to get to this point where in this class, part of our warm up is always this chest to wall hold. When you're doing this for endurance, you do want to be doing it kind of just to start building that straight arm strength. But if you want to kind of maximize the drill, even if it's part of the warm up, you can start thinking about that shift of the pelvic floor and that shift into the shoulders to redistribute the weight. And that's going to be the most basically efficient way that you can do that hold. Like you can be lazy about it if you're kind of like, I just need to like get some strength going here. But if you kind of want to combine like building some strength via time under tension with actually starting to think about alignment and building the patterns in your brain so it's a lot easier to access, that's a super good time to do it. Similarly, a lot of the times people are like, what can I do in between class so I can actually progress and work on stuff? And there's a really easy answer to that. One of the things that I tell people is a really good benchmark to get to is to be able to do 3 minute, three, okay, 1 minute long holds 3 times within a 20-minute period. So you're not doing a 3 minute hold on the wall. You're doing 3 1 minute holds. Um, and you will find probably if you start patterning that sort of alignment into the drill, that it actually will take a lot less energy to be holding for longer if you're stacked a little more efficiently. Because if your body's fighting for different angles, kind of, and there's different kind of weird pressure points, it's going to be more difficult to stay upside down than it is if you start shifting into alignment where the joints are kind of stacked in a much more efficient way. So totally good thing to think about and go through if you want something to do on nights you don't have class. Like literally just try to kick up, just start building up time, or not kick up because we're doing this chest to wall, but get on the wall, try to build up time, start trying to get to a minute. While you're trying to get to a minute, work on these 2 modifications to build up the alignment and start straightening everything out. Okay, cool. We have 4 minutes left. I feel like I had like a lot more to go over tonight, but instead we went over certain things in a lot of details. So since it looks like everyone is still a little tired, I will actually talk about hand position and kind of details about that. And then if you want to test things out, you can. If not, you can also just watch and learn and think about it. It's a pretty quick thing to think about. So I always say this without making a big deal of it, but when we do set up for a handstand, no matter how kind of what our task is in it, we do really want to make sure that our hands are not too wide. Like I have relatively broad shoulders and my hands are only about a foot apart from each other because that is the most efficient joint stack for me. If we're too wide, the way the muscles have to engage to support us is very different from when we actually stack up in this my hands are directly under my shoulder position. Um, and it's a lot more energy efficient. So that's thing number one is almost everyone sets up their hands wider than they need to at first. So just kind of pay attention to that, maybe take a video. Exceptions are always, there and you can train your body to do things however you want. But if you find you have a kind of wide stance, maybe just try experimenting with taking it closer. Like you don't need to worry about like getting the hands on top of each other. That's not efficient. That's more of a trick. But really, 99% of people start trying to do their handstands with their hands too far spread apart. That's thing one. Thing two is be conscious of where your fingers are, where your hands are turned. When we set up like this, my hands generally find my pointer fingers parallel to each other. This is something that's going to be specific to your body. If you don't have a preferred hand position yet, AKA if you are not consciously placing your hands in a certain rotational position when you do a handstand drill, then the two starting points I recommend are kind of finding the pointer fingers in parallel or finding the middle fingers in parallel. Most people have something kind of throughout there. Uh, and it doesn't really matter where you end up. What is important is that you figure out and be conscious of how you are setting up your hands. Because again, if you're just kind of throwing your hands down, you're not going to be able to consistently figure out how to navigate the floor with that hand position. So it is super duper important, no matter how you're setting them up, to be very conscious of what you're doing. And also don't just assume that whatever you do without thinking about it is going to be the most efficient way for our body to enter a handstand. Like if you just have totally passively thrown your hands down, what you have gotten in the habit of might not be what's most efficient. So it is super good to play around kind of with positioning and really see and feel out what feels different. Like try both like kicking up into a handstand and walking up into a wall and trying to shift the weight with different finger positions. And that's going to kind of help you figure out what is best for you. So it is technically 6 o'clock, but if you want real quickly to actually kind of give that a shot while I'm looking, to kind of maybe start interrogating it, it seems like we don't normally get kicked out by 6:05, so we might have some time if you've got some time. Also, if you're tired, feel free to be like, "Nah, I'm good." This is probably the last thing I'm talking about because technically class is over and I am still talking. So, but yeah, be conscious about your hand positions. It's very important, folks. And often the differences are going to be pretty minor. For me, what happens is I find certain hand positions are more conducive to pressing in certain ways. Certain hand positions help me kind of balance for duration. Certain hand positioning helps me if I need to like lower into a different shape. So the other thing is there might be many positions that work in different ways, but you're not going to be able to really figure that out and have access to that until you start being super conscious about how your hands are positioned. Nice, Jessica. That's looking good. That was also way more stable than the last one. So maybe if that was a different hand position, that's why. You good, Jamie? So, Lucia, one quick note for you. When you're kicking up back to wall, I definitely want you to intentionally focus on getting your hips to the wall first. Right now, you're kind of relying on the arch of your back for your feet to get there, and you're kind of supporting that too. And when you do that, it's much harder to pull into the kind of elongation of the lower back, which I've noticed when you're in the chest to wall position, you have much better access with. So my guess is probably that if you're kind of relying on that kick up and letting your feet hit the wall first, you're kind of inherently setting yourself up in an arch that makes it harder to elongate into your lower back. So just also be conscious when you're doing back to wall stuff that you try to think about getting the hips there first, because just by virtue of that, you kind of have to be able to extend into your back a little more rather than be in the arch for that. All right. These are looking good. Everyone did great tonight. Thank you for bearing with me as I made you do super basic drills for a very long time. But I bet your body will build these patterns better than they would have otherwise. Cool.